Welcome to the clinical cookout. You know you need it, it's kinda scary, but mental health is necessary. Four educated queens taking the lead, hold their hands and they'll help you succeed. Lay your head back, relax, just like that. Now listen to, learn, and your problems will burn away. Cookout, you know, we got just what you need. At the cookout, your heart and mind we will be. At the cookout.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. We are qualified clinicians who will cover various topics on mental health and will sometimes provide community resources. We are not being paid by any organization for our content, and any information we provide is general and pertains to our own personal experiences. We do not provide psychotherapy, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations on air. Any concerns related to your individual mental health should be directed to your medical and mental health professionals. We are not responsible for others' decisions or the subsequent consequences.
Welcome back to the Clinical Cookout. This week for the hot sauce, we got a lot to talk about when it comes to therapists and their boundaries.
Our hot sauce is when we talk about trending topics and we relate them to mental health. Let's get it.
Lately, I have seen or witnessed online that there are a lot of people who get upset when therapists set boundaries. For example, there were people who were literally having a meltdown because a therapist charged somebody, I think $125 for like a no-show fee. And those people were upset. Felt like that therapist shouldn't have charged that. Just basically was going off. And so I want to know from the aunties and from the audience, what do you think about therapists setting boundaries when it comes to their policies, when it comes to how they carry themselves online, just all different types of things that therapists like to put in place to not only protect their practice, but also protect their mental health?
And let me go.
That's a reach.
Go ahead.
$125?
Yeah, my late fee is $100. Or my no-show is $100. That's how it is. Listen,
my no-show is full fee. My no-show is.
Y'all must be working with the privileged people then, because
I am.
I charge $50, but that's because I have people with Medicaid. Like somebody with Medicaid, they're not gonna be able to afford $100, $200 no-show fee. So
my no-show is full fee, and I ain't had a no-show yet in my practice. Now, before, when I was working for a group practice, I had no-shows, but it's in my paperwork. If you don't show up, you get charged the full rate. I've yet to have a no-show.
Now, I do mine a little different though. I do mine where if you no-show, you have to send me an email within 24, 48 hours to reschedule, so you don't get charged. And then I do it differently for parents who have children. Like, I'm like, it's okay if you don't call me like 24 hours before that you have to cancel, because shit happens with kids and parents and stuff like that. I was like, so I let them slide a little bit. So they can work the loophole. They just have to do it. Now, I can't say that for other therapists, though. That's not everybody's practice. Just so the audience know.
If it's an emergency, I will refund it back. If it's an emergency, I'll refund it back. If you hit me up and say, this is why I didn't contact you, blah, 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 I'll refund it back. But again, I've never had a no-show. Now, I do have a late cancel fee. I've had that happen where people canceled under 24 hours and they got charged, but that's only half. That's half of my regular fee for that.
We have a late cancellation fee / no-show. And I was a big old advocate because there wasn't one before. It was the thought that it was punitive to patients. No, it's punitive to my pockets, my time, and it's disrespectful to my schedule and other people who actually really have problems that really want to be in there, for you to say, oh, I was asleep, or I'm sorry, I totally forgot. Okay, you won't forget the next time, as you have to pay. Because when you pay your money, you typically about that life. You like, nah, I paid my money, I'm going to go do this. Now, it's not the whole fee. I think it's like $90 or something like that. But, or maybe even, it's like a 3/4 of the actual fee to have the counseling. But even late cancellation, if you reschedule, then that's one thing. But just to show up, I think is disrespectful. Just to not show up is disrespectful, because that's $150, 100 and whatever, however many dollars, whatever people charge, that somebody else could have been in that slot. And other people actually really need help. So when we're putting people off months and months at a time, and you will sleep, it's disrespect. And if I'm holding you accountable, and I hold all my all my patients accountable, then that's accountability. And once we implemented a no-show fee, the no-show slowed down by like 90%.
And let's be clear, if it's a true emergency, even the group practice I work for, you can get fees waived. If it's a true emergency and you hit me up and say, I'm so sorry I late canceled, but this is why, waived. You don't get that charge. But there have been people, I actually saw this on Twitter, I think. The guy was like, my therapist charged me a fee because I called and said I had an emergency. And once she told me what the fee was going to be, I was like, well, I just come to the session so you didn't have an emergency. Because a true emergency, you still couldn't have made that session. And then she probably might have would have waived the fee. But if you say, no, I'll just come in, then now it's hard for us, like, just like you as the client have to build trust and start and learn to trust your therapist. It is people who will try to get over, and this is why we have to set boundaries in the first place. Like we can't pretend like clients are don't just do things and try to be manipulative or try to like play the system.
They do, and I think that's why I get so mad when my Medicaid clients don't show up, because actually you can't charge them a late fee. You can't charge them
Nope.
a no show fee by law. So I would get so mad and so worked up, like, you're getting these services for free. Like, you don't even have to pay for anything and you still just didn't show up. And then like when you call like a week later, you're like, oh well, my bad, I was still sleeping and my kid was sick or whatever. Can I reschedule? Like, no, you can't reschedule because you didn't show up and I had you in that time. Now, lucky me, I do have a pretty lengthy wait list. So anytime somebody doesn't show up, I could just call up somebody on the wait list and normally I can get somebody in for that time. But it just still just makes me so mad that you have access to this service and you still choose to just do whatever you want and not care about my time.
Conversation started to expand, like how therapists are treated versus other professionals. People are like, well, would you no show a doctor, like a medical doctor? Would you no show a lawyer who you would have to pay X amount of money to? Like people started to say, why can't therapists set boundaries and you wouldn't treat other professionals like this?
I just had this conversation because I got a call. I can only come in on Fridays around 3 o'clock. I'm sorry, for who? And it has to be me? That's not right. So I can only come in at certain times, and then as a therapist, if you don't accommodate them, then you're in the wrong because you know that people need mental health help, and y'all are the biggest advocates for mental health help. And that might be true, but at the same time, when is the last time you called your primary care doctor and you had something going on with your leg and you said, hey, but I can only come in on Tuesdays at 2? You gonna be available? They're gonna be like, well, there's other hospitals and you can go and see another provider. So no, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I actually Suge is the one who got me out of that place because I was catering to my client schedules a lot, and I was like, I can't do this. Like I'm stretching myself thin trying to get the kids from their activities and do this, and I'm taking late clients. I can't do this. She was like, well, they supposed to fit your schedule. I said, yeah, but I mean, I need to make sure I know that they work, and but she was like, yeah, but they take time off work for a doctor's appointment, and I had never really thought from that lens. So it's like, yeah, when I make a doctor's appointment, they'll tell me we don't have no availability until this date, and I just got to take what they give me, or take the time slot, the options that they give me. So it is to me really frustrating how people hype up mental health care now, and it's become this thing that's gotten bigger and people have more awareness, but the actual mental health care workers are not deemed as valuable as a medical provider, as a doctor, or even as a lawyer. Like nobody questions a lawyer's fees, but you question our fees. Why you gotta charge that much just for me to talk to you? Why you gotta charge that much just for you to do a test for me? Do you know how much it costs for me to go to school? Do you know I'm not bringing in that full fee? You paying that, but that ain't what I'm bringing in.
Have you heard your problems?
What'd you say?
Have you heard your problems?
Testing
Like,
materials, thousands of dollars. Like that's
people
another.
don't know that though. They
Those
don't
things,
know that.
it's a lot of money.
They don't know the overhead of running a practice. like the things that I have to pay for out of pocket. And so I'm just like, you would never question a lawyer's fees. You would never question a doctor's fees. What makes us so different?
Because people feel like since you are a mental health therapist, you're supposed to be for me getting my mental health together, even if it's getting together on my terms. And that's true, but I can't help you to hurt me. So while I'm helping you get your mental health together, I still got to keep mine intact. Otherwise, who's going to help you?
I also think that there's a component, and this is just my personal opinion. I think there's a component of therapists, majority of therapists are women. And so it's this, maybe there's this unconscious like thought or unconscious bias of, well, women are typically nurturers. They're typically flexible. They're typically going to do like work around me. So when they don't, now all of a sudden it's, oh, why do you have this boundary set? Because typically women are seen as a whole as being the nurturers, the flexible person, versus doctors are typically males, and males set boundaries, and people typically see them as, this stern whatever, and we just
Mhm.
have to go by what they do, versus women, especially in business, aren't seen that way. And I think that's also a harder thought for people. Just unconsciously. I don't think people are intentionally trying to do that, but I think it's just a way we have society set up, because most of us are women that are therapists.
Ah,
And I'm wondering, would the same kind of conversation happen with a male therapist if a male therapist had these same boundaries? Because all I see is women talking about it. I don't see very many male therapists saying, "Oh, well, nobody wants to pay my fee when I set this fee." I don't see male therapists saying it. Might be. I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually never thought about it that way. I didn't think about like that subconscious, like
Mm-hmm.
gender stuff. I didn't think about that. But yeah, I do think that um some people take advantage of just not even us being women in this field, but just mental health providers in general. Because, when you have 20 to 30 people on your caseload, and this isn't like doctors where you're seeing those 20 to 30 people for like 15 minutes or 15 to 20 minutes. You spend a good 50 minutes with each of these people. And then on my end for evaluations, I'm spending a good 3 to 4 hours with each person. So being able to accommodate your schedule, I can do it that to some extent, but also like no, I can't do that for everybody all the time. But this is like a part of us as therapists trying our best to accommodate clients so that they have access to care, but also keeping up with our own stuff, right? Keeping our schedule straight, making sure we're good, making sure we have the time in between sessions to kind of switch over and take care of our own mental health. So we are going to shift this conversation a little bit to talking a bit more about accessing mental health for people in the community, and what are some of the barriers to that? What are some of the different ways that you can access mental health? So let's go ahead and hop into our main dish.
The cookout, we got just what you need. At the cookout, your heart and mind we will be. At the
Hey y'all,
cookout.
so we are switching over into talking about access to mental health and the barriers to that access. So there are so many different things that can impact your ability to access mental health. One of those things is income. We did do an episode previously on socioeconomic status and how that can impact mental health. So if y'all have not checked out that episode from season 3, I would recommend that you go do that. But in terms of income levels, there are different income levels: high, middle class, lower class. And that can affect your access to mental health services in general, but also the quality of the services that you're giving and the quantity, the amount of services that are available to you. So, Aunties, I just wanted to ask, what income or what populations do you work with in terms of income?
So I am licensed in Colorado. So when people even hear Colorado, they automatically assume money. Colorado does have a very high homeless population, though. So I actually work with all the income. I work with super, super low income, like below poverty level, that level. And then for my own practice, it's typically like middle class and up because I am self-pay. So because I don't take insurance, I don't typically get the lower income at my practice, but I work with lower income through an agency.
And at the agency I work at, it's pretty much middle class, or maybe lower middle, like the people who can afford Blue Cross, TRICARE, Aetna, the people who have decent insurance. Um, I would like to do some Medicaid, but outside of actually going to Medicaid clinics, that's the only way I'll be able to do it because even the company that I work for, they don't accept Medicaid.
Okay, and yeah, I work with all income levels as well. So I accept all types of insurance and I also accept self-pay.
I work with rural Appalachian community. So that's the population I work with right now. And previously, before that, I worked in the urban area in Cleveland, working with children.
I'm sorry. What's rural Appalachian?
You know what? You know what? That's a good question. That's a good question. That's a very, very good question.
I'm always
Um,
gonna ask the question because what?
no, no, I think you, no, I think it's a great question. It's a great question because I had the same question when I first applied or when I first became an intern there. I was like, what in the hell is a rural Appalachia?
I immediately thought the Hatfields and McCoys. I literally thought West Virginia redneck moonshine makers. That is where my head went.
Well, it's yes, people typically label those individuals like that, and they really try hard to, say, hey, we don't like to be called that because just like other cultural groups don't like to be called whatever stereotypical name. So, but I understand that that's the first thought that pops in people's mind when they're not educated about that community. So typically it is 99% white. However, there are rural Black Appalachian people, and there's a lot of like history down in southeastern Ohio around slavery and stuff like that, and like how like the I think there was like the railroad and stuff that went through West Virginia through Ohio. So it has a lot of like historical African roots actually. And specifically the Appalachian community is very rich in culture, a lot of farmers. There used to be like a whole like coal mining place and stuff like that back in the day. But I specifically worked down there in Appalachian community to address the opiate crisis and just mental health. I was there as an intern, and then they invited me back as a health service psychologist. But now I'm a regional master trainer down there. But that's pretty much the Appalachian community.
So in
And
terms of income, like where do they fall? Are they higher income, middle, low, rural? I would assume
yeah,
are probably on the lower end, right?
surprisingly enough, it's mixed. There are
Mm.
people down there with lower income, but there are also people down there with money. And a lot of people don't know that because they assume that they're like, rednecks, hillbillies, all that stuff. And so you think very dirt poor. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't areas like that that aren't like that, but there's definitely people down there with money as well. Because I done seen the houses. I done lived next to them or lived down the street from them. So it's like weird. You'll have like a trailer park, nice apartments, and then a mansion all on the same street. It's like it's interesting. At least that's how it was when I lived in West Virginia. So, but yes, it is a mix of income.
Well, the purpose of me asking y'all that was to see that all of us work with different income levels. So no matter whether you're higher income, middle class, lower class, you could still access services through the four of us in our respective states. And that also goes for other agencies, other providers. It's just in figuring out like where you can find the services and who accepts your insurance or how you can pay for it. So I guess one of the questions I have for the aunties is, in terms of barriers to accessing mental health, what have you seen in your time in the field?
I can talk about being down in southern Ohio. There is a lot, like they have issues with access to internet. So when COVID happened, we had to there was a lot of adjustments that had to be made when COVID happened, because people couldn't come in or people had to be at home and do telehealth. But when you're living in an area that has poor internet access, then how do you even get these people to get telehealth? And you're probably wondering, well, why didn't they just come in and drive in? Well, if you know Appalachian community, you would know that there are barriers to transportation because things are so spread out Like sometimes it takes you 30 minutes, 40 minutes to get where you need to go. Sometimes to the grocery store, sometimes, just to get internet access. People have to drive down the street just to even get um not internet access, but Wi-Fi and stuff like that. So there were a lot of issues when it comes to trying to get even the basic stuff. So the barriers, it was just one on top of the other, on top of stigma. It's a very religious community. So on top of stigma, you had all these barriers. So that's what I ran into mostly.
Mhm. Yeah, I would say one of the biggest barriers I've seen, especially with certain populations that I have worked with, is the stigma around mental health stemming from either their families or from their religious backgrounds. Like there's this stigma about seeking mental health care. Because I predominantly try to work, well, the populations I predominantly work with are people of color, LGBTQ. Military is easier. Like military, it's not a barrier there. Like there's always access to care if you are connected to the military. You always have a way to get care. But for other populations, it's more like this stigma. So that's the barrier for them, like trying to overcome what will be thought of them, as opposed to actual technical barriers like internet access and things like that.
um it it drives me because a lot of times people, like, they'll say that they want all this access to care, and a lot of times they do have access to care. So I've had to tell some people, if you have Medicaid, you have mental health care. And then they'll be like, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And so sometimes people just don't know. But when I inform you and you do know and you still don't go and go get the help, then I feel like it's on you that you don't have that access to care. So you have access. That's the barrier, I would say, that I've been seeing. That's the one that frustrates me, is having access, but then it being a mental barrier that you don't have access, and so still suffering. So sometimes my new question has been, do you want the problem or do you want the solution? So actually make people answer that question. Like, do you want the problem? Because some people, they'll keep complaining and complaining and complaining. They'll keep on wanting to complain. And then I'm like, okay, well, I gave you a solution. So do you want the problem or do you want the solution? And then it makes them think, like, it's like CBT. Well, I guess, do I want the problem? Do I want the solution? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, I want the solution. Okay, so now what's the next step?
Yeah, I totally agree. So I agree with the fact that access is there. It's actually becoming more accessible these days. Like there are so many different ways that you can get mental health services, even if you don't have like insurance. But it's the motivation to actually go and the stigma that's attached to it. And I get so irritated with, because I accept all different types of insurance, and I do that because I know that there are certain people that are going to keep their appointments and they're coming no matter what. There's a certain demographic of people that tend to no call, no show. They just don't show up. The access, they have it, it's free for them. They don't have to pay anything, and they just don't show up more often than not. Um, and then get upset with me about it because I won't see them because they didn't show up multiple times. So there is that frustration too from clinicians and providers as well. Like if you have the access to it, you schedule this appointment, you decide this is what you're going to do, and then you just don't show up, that kind of like messes it up for other people within that demographic as well. There are a lot of different ways to access it. There are, of course, if you're in the military, like Auntie Ashley said, you can access services that way. There are nonprofits, mental health agencies within the community that will provide services to people who may not have insurance or have no other way. You can even get it through your job now. They have like I can't remember what it's called, if it's
EAP.
like EAP or something like that, where you can get mental health services through your job. And then there are online providers now that provide mental health services. I would just say to be careful when you look for these services. Do your research and know what you're looking for, because some of these online mental health providers are advertising or promoting certain things in terms of like getting a whole psychological evaluation online, which is not something that you can necessarily do virtually or online. There are certain tests that have to be provided in person or in a certain way, in a certain setting. So just being careful, because some of these providers will diagnose you with things that you don't necessarily have. They'll provide you medication. And if they're providing you medication for a diagnosis that's not accurate for you, then that's not really going to help you. So just making sure that you do your research when it comes to finding the services. But they are more accessible now.
I
That's
agree.
not a, oh, keep going.
Well, I was just gonna say I agree with the different type of services. I think people automatically assume that they have to go to individual therapists, but in my community and where I work at, well, I live in Columbus, but I work in rural Appalachia, and they have parenting groups, different type of cafe stuff that you can attend, and different type of like group settings where you don't necessarily have to go to something like go to an individual therapist. You can get stuff from other entities, I guess, or other ways.
And also just because, well, one, group therapy is great. And I always tell people, even if it's a fee associated with group, like you do have free groups and stuff that are offered in communities, but even fees for group is far less than individual therapy. So don't like knock group therapy if you can't do individual. That is another option for sure, as for access to care. But when Auntie Amber, when you were saying, there's resources and there's online and there's these online entities now, I think a lot of people too, one of the barriers that I've actually heard from people is that they fear, if it's free, what is the quality going to be like? And that's a legit fear. If I'm not paying for it, this quality of care might be trash. This therapist, this whoever might be trash, might not treat me the same, might not, provide the same care they would provide if I was a paying client. So I've heard that fear. And then also another barrier is provider shortages, because online has blown up now because a lot of us, we got wait list. It's like we are so overwhelmed with clients, you wait in 2 to 3 months. Yeah, you found a therapist, but you won't see them for 3 months. And that's the problem, because if you got a problem right now, 3 months might be too far.
I tell you now, that weeds out the people who don't really want therapy. When you be like, I got it, I have a 2 month waiting list, or can you wait 2 weeks? Because sometimes you start getting those calls and it's like, I need therapy now. I got this big problem right now. And then the next thing you know, you set up an appointment and they don't show up. So my supervisor always say, well, that's how you weed out the borderlines. That's how you weed out the people who say they have a problem right now. And then if you have a problem right now and this is big of a problem that you need therapy, it's still gonna be there next week. So I do appreciate that as a provider. Not the long wait list, because I do have a hard time having a long wait list, but sometimes it does weed out people who's not really serious about their therapy, because you can't help somebody if they're not willing to help themselves.
I'm gonna take I'm only going to take a different route on that one, only because I think partly it's the mental health system's fault too. Like we are so unprepared for, well, first of all, nobody could have predicted COVID was going to come. So, but it just goes. It also, I think it also highlights, those individuals that may not be ready for therapy, but it also highlights our system cracks, the cracks in our system. And I think that a lot of what we need to do as like the system is also address some of the cracks that we got going on, because these wait lists are crazy for like autism assessments, ADHD assessment. People are waiting a year. Even at hospitals, like known well hospitals, have a year wait. And I'm like, what have we done over the past 20, 30 years where we're not getting mental health professionals enough? Like we're not producing enough. And I think that we need to go back and look at some things too on our part as a system, because we ain't helping it no better. But yes, to y'all point, keeping y'all's appointments.
Well, partly it's because talk therapy is different from psychological assessments. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about talk therapy, yeah, you're going to weed out the people who don't really want the help. But when you're talking about psychological assessments, there's just not enough people that's willing to sit down here and do them. Out of the four of us, Amber is the most excited about it. Now we all at least three of us do them, but she's the most excited about it. Think about in grad school when there was a lot of people that was like, I don't want to do testing. I want to do therapy. There was a lot of people that didn't want to do that. And so I think the people that out there that are doing testing, there's not a lot of them. And then a lot of people don't know where to go. I get so many people calling me a psychiatrist, it's not even funny. Or people saying, do I look for a psychiatrist or or a counselor so I can go get my daughter an ADHD test. So a lot of
Yep.
people are also not informed about who you go to go get a psychological assessment. And then whenever you do find out, the waiting list is 18 years.
Yep. I agree.
But I also think so. I do agree with you, Auntie Keish, but I see it as a good thing that the wait lists are so long now. Not so much in terms of access for people, but the fact that people are asking for it. So I think that, maybe 10 years ago, this whole mental health is a real thing started happening and people started like letting people know like, hey, you need to go do this, you need to get therapy, you need to do that. Over the past decade, the awareness has increased so much that people are now like, yeah, like we about to go get some help, right? So the wait lists are that long because the awareness has increased so much. But in that awareness increasing so much, there haven't been a lot of mental health professionals that have come through or like finished school. And I think even accessing programs to where you can get your master's in counseling or whatever, now that is online, so you're able to access it a little bit more. So I do think in the coming decade, it may get a little bit better. But
So
right now, we're just kind of in that in between where people are becoming more aware of it. And that's what we want. We don't want to
yeah,
discourage that awareness. We also want to be able to provide when they need that. So
agree.
whether you have to wait 2 months or 4 months, you're still going to get the service. It's just going to take a little bit longer.
Agree.
Another thing too is some of the companies that do the mental health assessments, and this may be something good for you, Amber, it's something I'll definitely be looking into. But down the line, some of the companies they partner with like these learning centers. For our company the company that I work for is partnered with like the Masonic Learning Center, and so people with whatever kind of insurance can go to this center, and then they'll help out with reading and dyslexia and stuff like that, and then the center actually says, hey, this person needs an evaluation. And so it's not that it's trumping everybody, but they have more direct access to that kind of care too. And a lot of people don't know about that because I just found out about it, and I've been practicing since 15.
Yep. And one of the things that I do for evaluation, so my schedule is booked out for at least like 3 to 4 months out. And I kind of cap it at 3 to 4 months because going any further than that is ridiculous. But I leave 2 spots open each week. I can either use those spots to write reports, I can use those spots for therapy clients, but I keep them open just in case there is an immediate need for somebody for an assessment. So if somebody, was hospitalized recently and they're getting out and they need an evaluation in order to integrate back into society, I'm like, you know what? I got something for you next week. Let's do that. That helps me. That allows other people that really need it immediately to have access to it. And then also, word of mouth for me is a big thing. So all these evaluations that are booked out for months, those are usually from like insurance referrals. But if somebody comes in and they're like, hey, somebody in the community told me about you. Can I get in for an evaluation? I use one of those spots. I'm like, yeah, I can get you in 2 weeks because now there's a word of mouth there. People know they have access and they can come to me. So I'm going to make sure that I accommodate you. So I do try to leave some spots open for people that really need it instead of saying, "Well, I'm sorry that you just got out of inpatient. You're gonna have to wait 6 months now. Sorry about that." Like I do try to help with getting those services as quick as possible. But again, there's just not enough testers in this community or even the other places that I've worked. There's not enough evaluators.
We don't have enough either. Down in where I work at, we don't have enough. There's literally four of us out of a company of 700 people. Like there's only four people who test, and that testing waitlist is almost a year long. So absolutely, we don't have enough. And then for my private practice, which I forgot to mention, I work with middle to higher income, and that's strictly telehealth. But there's like 7, 8 people out of that practice that does testing, and their testing wait list is only 2 months. So the people down where I work at in Southern Ohio aren't getting the same quick access like the people I work with up in Northern Ohio. And again, that's where we are. Depending on income, depending on where you're at, depending on access. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
I think a lot of people scared too of telehealth, like
Mhm.
outside of the testing, they're scared of telehealth because until COVID. Like when COVID came, telehealth was like the big bang. And then now you get a lot of older practitioners that are kind of like, oh, they don't believe in it, or they don't want to do it, or they think it's trash. And so then you get a lot of people that kind of buy into that, even if it's not true.
I was one of them in the beginning when telehealth started. I was like, nah, bro. Like, I cannot do, as a therapist, I cannot do therapy with someone on a computer. I was so against it at first. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm only doing it in person. COVID's just gonna have to end in order for me to do this. But now I see the value in it, and that's access. Some people just cannot drive 30 minutes to my office to see me. So if they can do it in the comfort of their home, if they can get in quicker that way, if they can access services that way, then I'm actually open to it now, and I do more telehealth with my therapy clients now than I did before.
And I can see people all over Ohio, like they don't have to come to the office. I can
Exactly.
see people all over Ohio doing telehealth. And so I think that's one of the great things that I like about telehealth, because I was kind of against it, not really sure about it too, Amber, in the beginning. But now that I do it, I'm like, "Puh, that's the only thing I'm doing." They're like, "You guys want to come back in the office?" Nope, staying online.
I'm strictly telehealth, so I never had an issue with it. I started with it, and the the only thing I ever heard client from the client side, the fear was we won't make the same connection if it's over the computer as opposed to in person. But they found out real quick that wasn't true. Telehealth has never been an issue for me, and it gives a lot of access to care for people, even not even so much people who maybe have to drive a long distance, but sometimes you just don't feel like going outside your house. Like right now, it's cold everywhere. I could go drive. I don't want to. I don't want to go to the office. So if I don't want to go, I know the client doesn't want to go. So telehealth it is. That's a great way for more people to be seen. But it's also because, like Auntie Keisha just said, she can see people all over Ohio, but she's still only one person. So this is what leads to burnout on the therapist side. And this is another reason why I think a lot of people don't want to do testing, because I know that's why I don't want to do testing and I'm not. I mean, it is what it is. 3 out of 4 of us is good enough. I'm not doing testing because I'm not getting burned out. There's not enough testers, which then tells me if I do it, I'm gonna have too many clients trying to get tested, and then I'm gonna be burned out. So I'm just not gonna do that. Um, and then there's also a lot of mental health providers leaving the field for that very reason because of burnout, which will then again mess up access to care because it won't be enough providers. So I think it's gonna always be this kind of negative loop where it just doesn't work out, where mental health catches up to now the awareness that people have.
That's true, Ash. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I was just okay. No, I was gonna say that's true. I think that the only time I don't do telehealth is when somebody is suicidal, or when somebody is I mean, so anxious, or so has social anxiety, because then I'm not helping you, right? Because you sit in the house, you're not coming out, you're not, you know what I mean? Like, as a part of my treatment plan, like, then I might deviate a little bit and like try to give like different goals. And so I have like one patient who comes in, and when I found out that she has social anxiety, she thought, well, I'm just gonna be doing telehealth, telehealth, telehealth. Mm-mm. Sometimes you're gonna have to come in. You know what I mean? There's an aspect of you. There's a helpful aspect, a therapeutic aspect of you sitting in the waiting room, actually coming up to the counter and talking to the person, checking yourself in, and then coming in the office and talking to me directly. So sometimes I'll use it as a part of my treatment plan, depending on what the issue is. And with depression and suicidal ideation, you have to be in person for me.
And that's a
That's when,
legality thing.
yeah, it's
That's
definitely a
a
legality
legality
thing.
thing. Yeah, like you want to get your eyeballs on somebody who, yeah, and maybe if they even have a history of suicide attempts or ideation, like, yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah, and I think for evaluations as well, I prefer in person. So I can do therapy, telehealth, probably not kids. Me and kids and telehealth, we don't mix very well. Some people can do it really well. They have like activities and they're like in there doing it, but for me, you're gonna have to come in person. But for evaluations specifically, I think in person is important to be able to observe them. So like on telehealth, they can show you only what they want you to see, right? From the shoulders up. But whenever you're in person, you can see anything. Like, especially there have been times when someone will tell me like, oh, I don't have a history of harming myself, like I don't have a history of hurting myself, and I can clearly see the lines on your arm. But if we were telehealth, I would have never seen that, right? So I wouldn't have been able to talk more with you about that. So I think I do agree with Auntie Shug. Telehealth can be good for some things, but for other things it's necessary for you to be in person.
Providers who do provide services with people who have self-harm and suicidal ideation, but that's not all providers. And if there are certain providers who are just not comfortable with that, and it could be a legal issue. But I've been able to finagle and do certain things. So there are your specific providers, but just to the audience, not everybody's okay with that, and not everybody wants to, have that distance. They want to actually see you in person. So just so the audience is aware.
So we did talk a lot about access to care and making sure you're going to go get care. Now, one thing I do want to point out, and this was a very positive thing for us, is that on our live, because we talk so much about access to care and the reasons why you should go and go get therapy and some assessments, we actually got somebody who actually looked into going to go get an assessment. And I just thought that that was like good, because I mean that means that we're reaching our goal, which is providing people with access to care all over the place and knowledge about access to care. So with that being said, we did our job. What y'all about to do?